Our speaker is Sam Allberry. He's a pastor from the UK who studied at Oxford and now works for Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. He's the author of the book, Is God Anti-Gay?, which is available in the back if you'd like a copy. So please welcome Sam.
Thank you very much for your welcome. Can you all hear me at the back? Oh, it's up there as well. Hello. So you can tell from my accent I'm not from around these parts, but it's very good to be with you this evening. Thank you for coming along to this session. Thank you for your concern for this whole area, for caring about this issue. As Christians, we want to be people who care about all of life. And I hope it's okay to say this. I want to thank the guy who shared on that video, and I'm glad he was willing to be so open with us. I also want to say we want to care about other people, and I'm sure dump wasn't the choicest of words he could have used during that video. I just want to recognise that in case that's troubling any of us, as it might well do. We're thinking this evening about the whole issue of sexuality. And for a lot of people, this is one of those big societal, cultural, political issues. And I'm guessing for virtually all of us, it's not primarily a political issue or a societal issue. It's a personal issue. This isn't about Western civilization or political progressiveness or anything else. It is about people that we know and care very deeply about. The issue matters to us because of people who matter to us. And I'm guessing in a crowd this size, there'll be a number of us in the room for whom this is an issue for us as well personally. This is an issue we have our own kind of story to tell. So I'm very aware that we're treading on sensitive ground looking at an issue like this evening. Really, my aim is to share something of my story, some of the things I hope I've learnt along the way. I would love to hear thoughts and questions as we discuss this afterwards. I think we're due to finish around 8 o'clock, so if you're wanting to know when you can escape, 8 o'clock we should be done around then. For as long as I've had any kind of romantic or sexual feelings, they've been for people of the same sex. I didn't choose to have these feelings. I didn't wake up one day and think, I think life would be a bit more kind of interesting if I really fancied guys rather than girls. I didn't choose to be this way, and to my knowledge, nor was I made to be this way by other people. I've not had a difficult relationship with either parent. I've come from a very loving, close-knit, stable family. It just happens that I found myself attracted to other guys and not to girls as I was growing up. And it took me a long time to kind of work out that was what was going on. I'm slow at the best of times. But it actually took me a few years to recognize the kind of feelings that I was experiencing and to learn how to even name them. I think the first indication was when I was about 14, my best friend at high school. I remember it was a Monday morning. We were all catching up on each other's news from the weekend. And he shared with the kind of gang of us who were chatting that he had just got together with a girl and they were now going to start dating. And I can remember everyone kind of like being really happy for him and encouraging him. And we're English, so we do that in a very understated sort of, well done, good kind of way. We don't shoot guns in the air or anything like that. And I just remember, although everybody else was kind of like congratulating him, I just remember feeling really crushed. I had no idea why. And I couldn't even sort of step out of myself enough to kind of think, why am I feeling that way? I just remember feeling as though my friend was now really close to someone else, and that felt really threatening. I hadn't consciously thought of him in any kind of sexual way, but evidently I was at that stage feeling a very close emotional bond to him. And over the next sort of few months, I began to realize I was kind of developing in a way that was a bit different to my friends. I didn't have the same feelings for girls that most of my friends did. I went to an all-boys high school, and so the only two things people talked about were sport and girls. Sport is hopeless for me. I can't throw a ball if you pay me money to. I'm fairly convinced, I don't have scientific proof for this, but I think my centre of gravity is outside my body. So anything that involves balance or coordination is just a no-go for me. So I couldn't really join in with that side of conversation. And it turned out I was pretty hopeless on the girl situation too. Occasionally friends would sort of say to me, so Sam, is there anyone you like, any girl that you're after at the moment? And I'd either try to change the subject, or, and I'm not proud of this, I would sometimes make up someone just to kind of have something to say. So a friend would say, who do you like? Is there a girl you're after? And I would say, yes. Quick, think of a girl's name. Denise. There's a girl called Denise that I really like. And then they would say, oh, right, who is she? Do we know her? And then I'd think, oh, help. No, you don't know Denise, because she's not from around, she's from very far, she's from Norway, actually. So no, you won't have come across her, you won't ever meet her or have a ability to prove or otherwise her existence in space-time. It was a slightly tragicomic part of my life. There were one or two girls I dated, thinking this would sort of maybe fix the whole situation. And it was all rather naive and kind of hapless. And whilst I had feelings of great affection for lots of my friends who were girls, I just didn't have the feelings of romantic or sexual attraction. And so it took me a long time to kind of figure out what all this meant. I remember one day a friend of mine brought in a pornographic magazine. This was pre-internet, so magazines were evidently the way to get hold of that kind of material. And I remember him passing this particular magazine around the group and showing us a particular picture. And I can just remember looking at this picture and thinking, I can't see why everyone else is getting quite so excitable about this kind of thing. And again, it just made me think, something's different here. I'm not seeming to be like the other guys are. And this was a good 20, 25 years ago, so it was a very different world to the world we live in now. Homosexuality was not on the radar in the way that it is now. I hadn't knowingly met a gay person. There was a guy in the year above me at school that everyone said was gay. I have no idea if he was or not, but it was clearly not regarded as a good thing if he was. And so it was not a culture where that would be the immediate go-to thing you would think of if you were going through the kinds of feelings I was going through. And it was not the kind of culture where you would want that to be the case, or where you would certainly tell anyone else if it was the case. All I knew was I didn't like girls in the way my friends did, and I was battling really, really strong feelings for some of my friends. Rather than being like my friends, I liked my friends. And that wasn't convenient, it didn't make life more straightforward. And I remember vividly one day I was in my final year at high school. I was just waiting to catch the bus home at the end of the day. And I don't know why the bus stop was the place for this particular revelation, but I remember just standing there waiting for the bus and thinking, I think I'm gay. I think that's what this whole thing is. And I began to realize that must be what it is. I'm blatantly in love with one of my really good friends. I can't bear the thought of not being with him. I don't have any of the feelings for girls that everybody else seems to have. And I thought, okay, that's what this is. And I remember then thinking, because around this time I was beginning to apply for universities, I remember thinking, well, maybe this could be something I run with at university. I knew that one of the schools I was applying to had, at that time, it was an LGB society. And I remember thinking, maybe I could kind of act on these feelings and explore this when I go to university, and then no one at home would need to know. Because I'm catastrophically old. This was, again, before the internet, and so we weren't Instagramming every waking moment of our lives. It was conceivable for me to lead a double life. It's a bit harder for you guys to do that, I'm afraid. But I could have got away with that. I could have been one thing at university, one person at university, and something completely different back home. So I was just beginning to wonder whether that might be the stage of life to kind of look into this and explore it. But soon after I'd kind of had that revelation on the bus stop, I ended up becoming a Christian. I hadn't grown up in a Christian home. I hadn't really had much background in Christianity. We didn't go to church when I was growing up. Didn't particularly want to, so I was quite happy with that. I changed my mind several times as a teenager about whether I believed in God or not, mainly depending on whether the Christians I knew at high school were annoying me or not. If they were annoying me, I would tend towards God not existing, just to wind up my Christian friends. It was not the most intellectually rigorous form of atheism, but I did go through a period of my life thinking, I don't think God exists, I don't think he's there, and then other times thinking, yeah, I think there might be something out there, but I don't want to go slapping labels on whatever it might be. But I did have a really good Christian friend who wasn't annoying, and a couple of times he said to me, do you want to come to our kind of youth ministry at church? You'd be really welcome to come sometime. And I had a huge amount of respect for this guy, really, really good guy. And so I remember thinking, yeah, okay, I'm open-minded. I'll come along sometime and see what I think. So I turned up at this church youth group, and I again was 17 years old, and so I was imagining a late 90s version of someone in their 30s trying to act and sound like they're a teenager. You know, I was ready for the youth worker. So I was assuming that some guy with a sideways baseball cap would kind of come in and say yo at some point and try and get down with the kids, as we say in England still to this very day. So I was ready for some kind of very bad, teen-friendly sort of presentation. What I didn't expect was a guy in his 80s to stand up and give a talk. Not a very long one, but he made no effort to kind of zap it up or kind of make it interactive. He just stood up and talked about following Jesus. And as a 17-year-old non-Christian, I should not have found him remotely interesting. But I found myself hanging off every word he said, because he said something I had never heard in my life. We'd done a little bit of kind of religious studies at school. We'd picked up the odd bit of Jesus once said this and taught that. My view of Jesus was he was a kind of cross between Gandhi and one of the Bee Gees. He was kind of said things about justice and ethics that sounded pretty good. And in my mind's eye, and in any pictures I'd ever seen, he had kind of long blonde hair and very, very good dentistry for a first century Jew. But this elderly man stood up and said something I had never heard before. He said, Christianity is not about God rewarding good people. I'd assumed it was. I'd assumed if you were Christian enough / obnoxious enough, then God would like you and you go to heaven, and that was what it was all about. No, he said Christianity is not about God rewarding good people. It's about God forgiving broken people. And he kind of began to unpack what that meant. And I began to think, I think he's talking about me. I've been a pretty well-behaved teenager. I didn't drink. I never smoked a cigarette, let alone anything else. I never really went off the rails, and so I was a kind of goody-goody teenage kid. But as this man started speaking about forgiveness and the need for us to be restored to God, somehow I just knew he was describing my heart. That actually deep down, I wasn't the me God had made me to be. The me that in my better moments I sensed I ought to be. And very soon after that, decided to become a Christian. Learned about the death of Jesus, learned about what that meant, and just felt compelled felt drawn to this man and thought, I want to live for him. Not really knowing what that would mean or what that would look like, but knowing that I wanted to do that. Well, soon into my Christian life, I began to encounter some of the things Jesus says about sex and about marriage. As you can imagine, as someone who was newly aware of his homosexuality and newly entering into the Christian life, at some point these two things I was going to figure out how and if they intersected. And two things I particularly encountered in the teaching of Jesus that was relevant to all of this. One was that Jesus, on one occasion, said that sex outside of marriage is wrong. If you're interested, it's in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 15, or in the parallel bit of Mark, chapter 7. It's not the only thing that's sinful. Jesus lists a few representative things that aren't right. But it was one of the things Jesus included, sex outside of marriage. And so it's not the case that Jesus never said anything about sex and was completely fine with anything people today might think. Jesus did have things to say on this issue. And then the other thing I encountered was a passage where Jesus is talking about marriage. A group of people ask him about divorce and say, because a few people have been teaching at that time apparently that it was fine to divorce for any reason, and so they said to Jesus, what do you think? And so Jesus starts explaining something about marriage. The implication is you're not going to understand divorce unless you understand marriage. And Jesus says to these people two things. Well, he says lots of things, but he starts off with two things as he talks about marriage. He goes to the first chapter of the Bible, Genesis 1, and quotes it and says to them, haven't you read that from the beginning he who made them male and female? That's a quotation from Genesis 1. Jesus is referring back to that. And then he says, for this reason, and now he's quoting Genesis 2, he says, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Now, lots of things are interesting about that, but what's particularly interesting about that for me as I was beginning to encounter this teaching was Jesus could have just said, listen, when two people get married, they become one flesh, and that's really not designed to be undone. That's kind of where he was going with that. But he doesn't do that. He starts off by saying, God has made us male and female, and for this reason, we have marriage. And so it became apparent to me that Jesus was saying something that's very, very controversial today, and by the way, the Christian view of sex and marriage has been controversial in every age. But Jesus was saying, as I understood it, that because we are male and female, we have this thing called marriage. Jesus was defining marriage according to male and female being different and complementary. So I was beginning to see in my kind of looking at the teaching of Jesus that sex outside of marriage wasn't right, and that as far as Jesus seemed to be concerned, marriage was between a man and a woman. So that made me think, I've got a choice. I figured there are three things I could do at that point. I could run with that teaching of Jesus and think, okay, I'm going to kind of accept that and live by it. That's option one. Option two is I could sort of reinterpret it. I'm pretty good at that. Every year when I come up with New Year's resolutions, they sound good in my head. I'm thinking, this is going to be the relaunch of Sam in January. The world's going to be very impressed. It's going to be tremendous. Okay? I've heard that word a lot recently somewhere. And every kind of December, I'll be thinking, right, New Year's resolution, I'm going to go to the gym more, I'm going to buy more fruit. January the 1st, I start. January the 3rd, I begin to kind of not get so good at it. January the 5th, I start to reinterpret my resolutions. Go to the gym. Well, the gym has a very nice hot tub. The resolution doesn't specify what I do in the gym. It also has a very nice cafeteria that serves cake. So I can fulfill that resolution pretty easily. buy more fruit doesn't necessarily mean eat more fruit. So I have a nice bowl at home with a lovely arrangement of gradually rotting fruit in it, and every now and then I refresh it and replace it and put some other nice fruit in there. And it looks nice, it's aesthetically pleasing in the kitchen. So I'm good at the reinterpreting things, so maybe I can just reinterpret what Jesus has said. And a lot of people have had a go at doing that. I've tried to read as much of those ways of understanding what Jesus has said as I can. I just don't think you can do it with intellectual credibility. I think it's clear Jesus said what he said. We can either run with it or not. I just don't think I can reinterpret that with any intellectual integrity. So that would leave the third option, which is just to reject the whole thing. Think, oh, well, I gave it a go. I was willing to kind of try the Christian thing for a bit. I took it for a spin. But actually, that's it. I'm done now. I decided to run with it. It's a decision that to many people today would sound absurd. Why choose faith rather than your sexuality? And there were two reasons why I did. The first is that and this is going to sound a bit like a bumper sticker from Alabama, but I did trust Jesus. The Jesus I had encountered by reading the Gospels myself was a Jesus who revealed God. I had no other way of accounting for who this man was. I looked at the things he said, I looked at the things he did, and I felt overwhelmingly convinced this man is God in human form. Moreover, this was a man who came to this earth when he didn't have to, and died for me when he didn't have to. We can explain more about why that's a useful thing to do and what that all means another time. But I was convinced he had shown me the ultimate in love, and that the God he reveals is a God who knows me far better than I know myself, who loves me more than I love myself, a God who is more committed to my ultimate joy than even I am. And so I thought, okay, well, whatever this Jesus calls me to do is going to be okay. I can trust him. And then the second reason I thought, okay, I'm willing to run with this is I had already seen in the Gospels that from the message of Jesus, he treats everyone exactly the same way. Jesus says there is something wrong with all of us. There is something about the human condition that is just not right. One of the first things Jesus said in his kind of public ministry was that people needed to repent, and that's a religious word that we might not quite know what it means. It literally just means to turn around. And if Jesus is saying, hey, humanity, I'm from God and you need to repent, the implication is that we're not naturally oriented towards God. We're not in sync with him. That's really what the Bible means by sin. It's that we're not lined up with God. And therefore there is a brokenness to every single one of us. And part of Jesus' message is that touches every single area of life. In no area of life are any of us what we should be. And that, I realized, meant that Jesus wasn't saying, Sam, because you're experiencing these feelings, you are broken in your sexuality. I realized Jesus was saying, every single person is broken in their sexuality. Every single person has desires that are not quite right in one way or another. And so in that sense, my conviction is that one of the things Christianity says is, if I can put it this way, no one is straight. Actually, the message of Jesus, as I began to understand it, is that all of us in our hearts are skewed. We're all a bit twisted. Not completely so that we're just awful monsters all the time. You all look to me like perfectly pleasant people. But that inside there is something that is not right. And therefore, for anyone to come to Jesus, there's going to be a challenge to how they think about sex and sexuality. No one is going to get everything their way sexually. It's not that Jesus says to one group of people, yep, you guys are good to go, you're all fine, off you go and enjoy. And then he says to another group of people, I'm sorry, but your feelings are all wrong. No, Jesus says all of us are broken in our sexuality. And therefore, for anyone to follow Jesus, there's going to be a constraint. There's going to be certain things we have to say no to, certain desires we have to say no to. And that is actually typical, if you are familiar with the teaching of Jesus, that is just typical of his message overall. On one occasion, Jesus said, this is one of the more famous things he said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Key word in that sentence is anyone. Jesus doesn't say to the gay community, to the LGBT community, you guys are going to have to deny yourself and take up your cross. And then say to another group of people, just come as you are, you're okay. Jesus says for anyone to follow him, whatever our sexuality, whatever our background, whatever we're into, Jesus says we're going to have to say no to self. That our self-identity, whatever it is, however you most kind of see who you are, is something we are going to have to learn to say no to. Jesus says we're going to have to take up our cross. At the time of Jesus, if you took up your cross, that wasn't wearing a piece of religious jewelry. You took up your cross when the Romans had sentenced you to crucifixion. You would then literally pick up the cross beam of your cross and you would carry it to the place where they would kill you. And from the moment you picked up your cross, in Roman law, you had no rights. And so anyone could do to you anything they wanted. And there are some accounts of people who had been so notorious as criminals that when they were sentenced to crucifixion, they were so abused by the crowd on the way, they were actually relieved to get to the point where they were now going to be crucified. And of all the images Jesus could pick, he uses that one to describe what it's like to be a follower of him. But the bizarre paradox of the Christian faith is what Jesus says immediately after he says that. He says, you've got to lose your life to save it. In other words, there is a sense in which following Jesus is going to feel a bit like he's killing you. It's not a good sales pitch, is it? But that's what Jesus is saying, that there's something, at some point, he's going to put his finger on something that is sacred to you and ask you to give it to him. And it's going to feel like he's taking your life. And yet Jesus says it is in the process of doing that that we truly live. Ironically, it's when we deny ourselves that we actually truly become ourselves. I don't become less me when I follow Jesus. I become more me. I hope that makes sense. And so I have felt as a Christian that it's right for me to be committed to celibacy, to being single. And I want to finish just by sharing three things that I hope will help you understand why that is not an awful way to live. Often when I talk about being celibate, people will say, well, why have you cut yourself off from intimacy? Why are you not being who you really are? So let me just tell you how I, as a single person, am able to understand and receive my identity, how I'm able to get intimacy, and how I'm able to get fulfillment. So identity, As I understand it, our culture pretty much says you are your sexuality. Your sexual desires, that's the thing that shows who you are. That's you at your most kind of fundamental level. That's the real you. That's you at your most you. Now, if that is the case, then your sexuality is everything. And therefore, fulfilling your sexuality is key to you being whole and complete. And I worry about that way of thinking. I worry about it because if you're someone who's not feeling as though your sexuality is fulfilled, you might think that the very best thing in life is passing you by. And in my experience, particularly talking to university students, even those who do feel their sexuality is being fulfilled, aren't necessarily feeling that that is what is making life now feel complete. And my real concern is it's too easy to go from you are your sexuality and your sexuality needs to be fulfilled for you to be complete, to go from that to thinking actually life without sexual fulfillment isn't worth living. Christianity gives us a different kind of accounting for who we are and where our identity is to be found. Jesus had things to teach about sex, as I've already shown, and we're going to look at one or two of these things tomorrow lunchtime. The other thing Jesus does with sex is he shows us it is not the be-all and end-all in life. He shows us that because he himself was celibate. So the man Christians believe was the most fully human and complete person to ever walk this earth, never had sex, never married, and was never in a romantic relationship. That tells me, as a Christian, that sex, romance, and marriage, though very, very good gifts from God, are not essential for being fulfilled as a human being. That is not the key to me having a fulfilled identity. No, my identity lies in something else. Second thing is intimacy. Again, I was talking to someone, actually I was in Montreal a couple of days ago and talking to one of the leaders of the Queer McGill Society, and she was saying, but why are you cutting yourself off from intimacy? And I tried to explain to her that in our culture we have pretty much collapsed intimacy and sex into each other so that we can't think of one without the other. It's interesting, you hear previous generations talk about friendship. We had this when we had the commemorations of the First World War. People would read extracts from diaries from 100 years ago. And I remember some people kind of rolling their eyes as these diaries talked about the deep bonds of friendship between some of the troops. I remember hearing people kind of rolling their eyes and saying, oh, they were obviously gay. But the fact is, one of the things the Bible shows us is that you can have a lot of sex and not be having any intimacy. And I imagine quite a few people today are just beginning to sense that. You can also have a lot of intimacy without having sex. And of course, it's perfectly possible to enjoy both at the same time. But in the Bible, sex is a way of expressing and deepening intimacy. It can't by itself create it. And actually in the Bible there are a whole range of ways of experiencing intimacy, not all of which are sexual. One of the great things that the Bible says is just how beautiful and noble a thing friendship is. I think we've really lost sight of this. In our culture today, as I understand it, we've really downgraded friendship. We've turned friend from being a noun to a verb. A verb that means you give someone else your contact details on Facebook. That's making a friend. No, in the Bible there's a book called Proverbs, which is kind of wisdom sayings. And one of the things you read in the book of Proverbs is that a friend is someone who knows your soul. It's someone who knows the inner you. And my experience as someone who's celibate is that being single has given me a capacity for a range of very deep friendships. When it comes to intimacy, I'm rich. None of it is sexual. All of it is real, and all of it is life-giving. But my fear for many people today is that we've put intimacy entirely into the category of sex. Final thing is fulfilment. A lot of people, understandably, would think about my situation and think, what? I mean, why? How can this possibly be a good way to live? So let me finish by sharing one of the most famous things Jesus said. If you become familiar with the teaching of Jesus, one of the things you have to get used to is he says a lot of things about himself. One of the things that draws me to Jesus is there's this unusual combination whereby he says outrageous claims about himself. Talks about himself being the kind of the center of everything God is going to do in the world. That kind of claim. I'm the one who's going to make the whole world right. That kind of claim. And yet at the same time, he is the most selfless man I have ever encountered in the way that he behaves and the way he treats others. So one of the things Jesus said one day was, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry. He who believes in me will never thirst. I am the bread of life. Some of you may have heard of that saying. And the trouble is, we hear him say that, and we think, that's great. I like bread. That's nice. That's lovely, actually. I was having lunch with someone recently. The waiter came up at the restaurant and said, would you like any bread for the table? And we said, no, we're fine for now. And so when we hear Jesus say, I'm the bread of life, it's very easy for us to think he's saying, would you like a little bit of religion for the table? A little bit of spirituality, just to, around the edge of your life a bit. But in the time of Jesus, and in some places still today, without bread, you died. Bread was the staple. Bread was food. And no bread meant no life. You would spend every waking hour of your day working to have bread for tomorrow. And so when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, he is saying that he is to your soul what bread is to a starving stomach. He's saying that only he can satisfy us at the very deepest level. No earthly, normal human relationship can satisfy us at that level. I've been a pastor for 10 or 15 years. I've seen lots and lots of marriages and relationships. And let me tell you, if you get together with someone and think, I'm getting together with you because you are going to fulfill my emotional and friendship needs, you're going to be a nightmare to be married to be in a relationship with. You're putting a burden on that person they cannot possibly bear. Because what you're effectively saying is, you're going to be the bread of my life. Congratulations. No, Jesus is claiming that only he can bring true satisfaction. Some of us look for that in sex. We think maybe if I'm sexually fulfilled, that will be what makes life feel like it's finally there. It might be something else, but for all of us, there's something which, if we have it, we can look at ourselves in the mirror first thing in the day and say, I'm okay. I'm okay. And Jesus is saying he is the only one who does make life okay. His is the relationship that will never disappoint us. We won't ever be fired by him. We won't ever be dumped by him. He won't ever desert us. He will always be faithful to us.
What do you make of the U of T campus debate surrounding Jordan Peterson and pronouns? And they go on to explain it. Isn't refusing the use of people's pronouns invalidating their existence?
I'm not from around these parts, so I'm not going to comment on whatever that situation is, because I don't know what that situation is, and I'm sure it's more complicated than one sentence would do justice. There would be two things I'd say to the kind of the broad issue of pronouns and the right kind of response to that. The thing I believe as a Christian is that ultimately our identity is something we receive from God. One of the great things about being a Christian is knowing that we haven't appeared by accident, we haven't coughed ourselves up into existence, but God has made us. And he intended to make us. We're not an accident. We're purposed. Your life has meaning and value intrinsically. And that the best way to discover who we really are is identity in the Christian life is not something we discover, it's not something we create, it's something we receive from God. That is a principle I apply to everyone, by the way. That's not something that one group of people needs to hear. It's what everyone needs to hear. We all get who we are wrong to one extent or another. In terms of pronouns, my practice is I will address someone in the manner that they present themselves to me in. That's probably a less clunky way of saying that. Don't end with participles or whatever it is. So for me, that's a basic courtesy. If someone gives me a name, that's the name I will address them by, and if they give me a pronoun, that's the pronoun I will address them by.
Thank you so much. What do we do about same-sex marriage? I've been with my partner for over half of my life. I want to be unified under God with him. How?
Thank you. So there are various things I'm very clear on as a Christian that I think make sense as a Christian. I wouldn't want to try to make other people live by my ethics unless they actually know who Jesus Christ is, because actually all the kind of ethics that Christians believe make sense in the light of the message of Jesus, of the gospel message. If you understand that message, you can make sense of the things that God calls us to do. Our ethics flow from our understanding of who Jesus is and what he's done for us. If you don't have that core understanding of who Jesus is, the ethics are just going to sound odd. I read someone in their office had one of these framed little motto things, and it was something like, he thinks the dancer's mad who doesn't hear the tune, or something like that. In other words, if you don't hear the music, the dancers just look weird. But if you hear the music, you can make sense of the dancing. And the Christian life's a bit like that. In the light of the music of who Jesus is and what he's done, the way Christians try to live makes sense. So I guess it depends on the person who's asking the question whether if they are a follower of Jesus, if whoever's raised that, if you are a follower of Jesus, I think to be a follower of Jesus with integrity, you need to follow what he says about intimacy and sex and relationships and honour that, even though that might be difficult. But again, I'd want to say, if Jesus says it's not appropriate for us to be in a sexual relationship with someone, he's not saying we can't have deep intimacy with them. And again, the Bible has a much higher view of deep friendship than we do. So my understanding as a Christian is that if I was in that situation, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to seek full kind of sexual unity with someone else who's the same sex as me. That I can't do that with Christian integrity. I can do it as a free human being, but I don't think I can do that and call myself a Christian, because at that point, I'm not actually following the teaching of Jesus. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sam. We've had quite a few different questions come in about interpretation, so I'm going to ask just a few of them.
Sure.
Why isn't reinterpreting the Bible a viable option? Very close to that. Wasn't the church wrong about many other things in the past? Why not on their interpretation of sexuality?
Thank you. So for us as Christians, the Bible is an amazingly rich book. It is authoritative for us as believers. But as you will know, if you've ever looked at the Bible, it's not always or even often a straightforward book. There's lots of different kinds of writing. There's poetry, there's song, there's narrative, there's all kinds of stuff in there. And we want to be careful and sensitive how we read it and understand it. We want to honour the form of the literature that we're reading. We don't read poetry in the same way that we read the instructions for a computer game or something. And so one of the applications of that, one of the lessons of that is that for Christians, it's good for us to read the Bible on our own, to have our own kind of walk with God, but it's also really important for us to read the Bible in community with others, so that we're actually comparing what we're seeing to what other people are seeing. And actually it's also really important as Christians that we do that not just with other people, but we hear what other Christians from other cultures are saying. Because as people in our own cultural moment, we will have particular blind spots. There'll be certain things we just won't see, and other things we'll see very clearly, whereas someone else from a very different culture will look at the same passage and say, how are you not seeing this? Which is why it's really healthy for us Christians to be in as far as we can in community with the global Christian family, and even more than that, to read what Christians from different ages have said as well. That's, I think, the best way of moderating against our own personal bias and blind spots. We all bring our own baggage to the text, and therefore there are going to be certain things that we skew in the way that we read it. There have been things the church has got wrong. That's very, very apparent. But I would say we've got those things wrong because we've gone away from the Bible rather than because we've gotten closer to it. So Christians who defended the institution of slavery, and by the way, there were many Christians who didn't, and also, by the way, just because I think it's historically interesting, there were Christians back in the day of Bishop Augustine who were trying to release slaves, who were trying to buy them out from the slave markets and free them. So it's not as if the church was always pro-slavery and then we realised, oops, no, that's wrong. There's always been a conversation on that. There's always been Christians who've seen from the Bible that slavery can't be right if we're all made in the image of God. And so I think where Christians tried to justify slavery from the Bible, they were doing it going against the grain of the Bible rather than going with the grain of the Bible. So we do get things wrong. There'll be things the church is getting wrong in our own day. I've no doubt about that, which again is why we need to hear voices from outside our own time and our own place. It's interesting talking with Christian believers from parts of Africa. They can't believe how much we Christians buy into the materialism of our culture. And all the stuff the Bible says about greed, we just kind of go, yes, really, 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 really bad greed is wrong. And then kind of, but gimme, and I just won't have really, really bad greed. And you read that with believers from other parts of the world, and I'm like, come on. You're being shaped by your culture here, you're not being shaped by God. So that's why we need to listen to those other voices. And certainly when it comes to an issue like homosexuality, there have been Christians who've tried to make a case from Scripture that God can bless same-sex relationships. I've tried to read as much of those arguments as I can. I just don't find them compelling. And it's worth bearing in mind that this is the first... Actually, this is an issue the church has had complete agreement on globally for centuries, just until the point where Western culture is making it a massive issue of cultural acceptance, which makes me just cautious about too readily changing what we believe on this issue. With any issue as a Christian, if you can show me from the Bible I'm wrong, I'll be very happy to change my mind. There are ways in which if I'm wrong on what the Bible says about homosexuality, there are ways in which that would make life a lot easier for me. But I'm just not persuaded that I can follow Jesus with integrity and go down that path. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Well, one thing I've really appreciated and sure may have tonight is your openness to share. So thank you so much, Sam. Another question, regarding the Bible's command to leave a father and mother to be united to a husband and wife. In what ways is that violated if someone remains single to reject homosexual relationships? What about God's command to produce offspring and spread fear?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess a couple of things to say on that. When the Bible talks about a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, I think what that's saying is that marriage creates a new family unit. So it's not saying you can't still live in the same home as your parents if you get married. I know some people who have to do that. But it is saying that when someone gets married, that's the creation of a new family. One of the things I try to say to couples if I'm preparing them for marriages is not to think we're going to start a family when we have kids, but actually when you get married, you are now a new family. And you still have responsibility and obligations to your existing family, but you are now a new family unit. Parents need to recognize that as their kids get married, that the dynamics should change at that point. So I just want to add that as an observation. The command God gives us to be fruitful and multiply. By the way, the reason for that command in Genesis 1 is God has just told us that we're made in his image, and therefore our vocation as people is to spread the image of God around the world so that we can be as God to the world. We can express his care, reflect his love and glory to the whole world. So that's why I think we're told to be fruitful and multiply. That isn't a command given to every individual. That is a command given to kind of humanity en masse. And otherwise people who are unable to have children for all sorts of reasons would be being disobedient, which clearly is not the case. So I don't feel like I'm kind of my not contributing to growth in human population, I don't think is going to stop humanity being fruitful and multiply. I think we're okay on that front.
I think a lot of people resonated with what you were starting to compare and contrast with our culture folding sexuality and intimacy together. So we've had a few questions on that topic as well. What do you do about sexual tension in intimacy? And what do you think about romantic but non-sexual relationships?
Thank you. Thoughtful questions. In terms of sexual tension, I mean, life is complicated, and so relationships are messy. They're wonderful, but they can be messy. And that's the case with any kind of relationship. It's a case with a family relationship, it's a case with a friendship, it's a case with a spouse or a romantic partner. None of these is just kind of automatically straightforward. Relationships can be very messy. Sometimes they can be very, very messy. But as I heard somebody say once, it's a mess worth making because we need relationship. So that it is entirely possible for there to be, and by the way, this is an issue for far, this is a very wide issue. The number of people who would say that they are heterosexual, but I know have had sometimes had boundary issues with friendships. That happens a lot because we sometimes confuse different kinds of intimacy. So this is not specific just to people in my situation. And I think it's always going to be the case that we want to, our responsibility as a friend is to honour the other person. And if we're feeling a sexual tension where it's not appropriate in a given friendship for one reason or another, we want to make sure that we're not thinking inappropriately about the other person, we're not treating them inappropriately, we want to be honouring them and serving them, and that may mean saying no to some emerging or latent sexual feelings. It's not just sexual feelings, sometimes we can become emotionally over-dependent or over-attached to someone as well, and again, that's not going to be a way of honouring them. So sometimes we do have to fight to kind of sustain healthy friendships. And that means, again, that there will be certain desires coming up from within us that we do have to say no to. But that actually is the case, I hope, for every single person in this room. Generally, if someone doesn't ever say no to their desires, at some point we need to lock them up. That's kind of, it's not healthy to think everything I feel must be indulged as I'm feeling it is not a healthy way to live. Most of us are aware of that kind of tension.
Thank you for that. So here's a question I think this person really resonated with something you said at the beginning about your journey. My good friend is gay and very against religion, especially Christianity, but I'm a Christian. What are some practical ways to include and reach out and continue my friendship with this person who are not yet open-minded, but they're a huge presence in my life?
Good. I think it's very important for, particularly there'll be a number of us in the room who are Christians, it is very, very important for us to hear just how hurt and wounded and fearful some within the LGBT community are because of what Christians have done and said. We may think, but I'm nice, I'm one of the nice ones. And it may well be that you are, I hope that's the case. But nevertheless, a lot of things have been done and said that have led some people rightly to feel very, very uneasy about Christians and Christianity. There's a certain amount of that, I think, as Christians we need to take responsibility for. There are certain things that have been done by Christians and in the name of Christ that I think have been very dishonouring. And sometimes it's even just Christians trying to say what they think is the right thing, but possibly saying it in the wrong way and at the wrong time and with the wrong tone. And so we may think, but I'm just saying what I believe. But the trouble is, for us as Christians, what we think about sex and sexual ethics is just what we think about sex and sexual ethics. It's one of a ton of issues we think about and have views about and try and understand how to live as Christians. Often for our friends in the LGBT community, this isn't an issue, this is them. And so we might think, but I'm just talking about sexual ethics. They might be thinking, no, you're talking about me. And therefore, we need to recognize as Christians that when we speak on this issue, we're speaking with sometimes an unintended gravity, and that those words are going to be heard far more loudly than we might be intending to say them. So we do need to be very, very sensitive to that. And I think actually the most important thing we should do, and this is the case for anyone with any friendship, is listen first and speak later. Sometimes in our zeal as Christians to share the message of Jesus, we can, I think, every time we encounter someone, we think, right, I've got to kind of get my beliefs into your head as quickly as possible so that I've been a good Christian. And it's a bit like throwing up on someone spiritually. You're feeling, but I've got to get this stuff out because I'm a Christian, that's what we do. There's someone, so we think, right, blah, and we vomit our faith all over them. We're feeling better because we've got it out of our system. And they're thinking, what the heck have you just thrown all over me? And actually, it's not being a good friend. No. It's not courtesy. None of us likes it when anyone else does that on their thing. So I think it's incumbent on us, if you're a Christian in this room, please learn to be a good listener. And so hear someone's story, hear someone's journey, get a sense of who they are, how they've got to where they're at, and then think, how can I, now that I know that, how can I serve and bless this person? And by the way, that is what I've just described is how to be a friend. That goes both ways too. So for those of us from the LGBT community, again, it's good for us to think, okay, I want to try to understand this Christian I'm getting to know and not just assume certain things about them, but actually I want to hear, how have you ended up being a Christian and what does that actually mean? What does that look like for you? So much of our our tensions come because we've assumed something about the other person that might not actually be true. We've picked up a stereotype, whether from the media or from someone else, and we've then applied that to every person who seems to carry the same label. So I think we need to do a better job of being people.
Yeah. That was a really good image. I don't think many of us will be forgetting that anytime soon.
You're very welcome.
What does being one flesh mean in the Bible?
Yes. It's one of the ways that the Bible describes the effect of the sexual union. So again, actually, probably the best way of answering this is come tomorrow lunchtime to the talk on sex. Why does God care? So I'm going to be talking about what in Christianity sex means, and that then makes sense of why Christians have certain beliefs about the appropriate context for sex. But the short answer is that one of the things we believe as Christians is that it fuses two people together in a way that is designed to be irreversible. It's why breaking up from a sexual relationship can be so incredibly painful, because actually the sexual act itself is meant to knit people together at a very, very deep level. But we'll talk about more of that tomorrow, but it basically means for us as Christians there is no such thing as casual sex. It can't be casual. And I'll say more about why that is tomorrow.
Well, that is a really good trailer for tomorrow. I wouldn't want to miss it. It's tomorrow at 11. What is your thought on someone who has moved away from God and struggles with homosexuality? Can that person go to heaven?
If anyone moves away from God, I'm sad, because it's such a wonderful thing to know the God who makes us. He loves us. And so one of the amazing things for me as a Christian is, when I say God loves you, I don't mean God feels he ought to love you. Because you're just annoyingly, you're there, and now you're there, he's got to love you and kind of tolerate you. What I mean when I say God loves you is God came up with the idea of you. You were his idea. That the stuff that does make you uniquely you and wonderfully you, God came up with that. He came up with that for his enjoyment, because he got a kick out of creating you. And it is wonderful, therefore, to know the God who made us. And so it's sad when anyone feels that they've gone away from God, because we're never going to get more out of life by being away from the God who gives us life. And we're never going to understand ourselves better by putting a distance between us and the author of us. And I think I'd want to say, if it's someone who's dealing with homosexuality is no reason to drift away from God. All of us are messy. All of us are broken. All of us have stuff going on. And so actually God helps us with that. He's not going to make things worse for us. He'll help us. So whatever issues we may feel like, I can't possibly come to God with this stuff going on, actually the amazing thing about the Christian message is God is pursuing you to help you with that stuff. So it's not that you've got to tidy yourself up and get everything sorted out and then you can come back to God. Actually, God is looking for you while you are feeling the messiness of life, because we're in over our heads. We can't fix this stuff. And so we need him.
I think that's probably a good place to end for tonight, so that we can have some time for some of these questions we asked Sam maybe personally. But you said that God is pursuing us, Sam, and it's a pretty overwhelming thing to think about. And so if maybe that person that's asking that question, or someone who tonight really is starting to believe that this God who really personally loves us is pursuing us, what would be the next step in us kind of saying?
The next step, if that is you, is actually the very next thing you should do is, no one needs to know you're doing this, by the way, so this is completely fine, is just say to God in the quietness of your own heart, please find me. because actually that's a prayer God loves to answer. I'm also going to say, chat to one of us. We'd love to chat to you, any of the folks here who are involved in this. We would love to, if we can help you in any way or be a sounding board, we would love to. But the first person you should tell is God, actually. That would be the best thing to do. Next best thing is talk to one of us.
Thank you, that's so helpful. And just before